Level 0 literacy? I haven't heard that name in 100 years. I'm just kidding. It's me. Hey, I went on vacation and then got COVID, and then Sam got COVID. So we've been facing a lot of delays recently, and I'm very sorry about that. But we're here, we're back, and we're bringing you Alan Wake, okay? So get hyped. Now, during the episode, we are going to spoil the events of Alan Wake beginning to end. We're also going to talk about a lot of subjects that include, but are not limited to, doctor-patient abuse, murder, jealousy, and all kinds of other stuff. Please use your best judgment before proceeding, and enjoy.
Hello and welcome back to Level 0 Literacy. My name is Mason, and I'm so happy to bring you our episode on 2010 action-adventure horror game Alan Wake. Joining me today is the champion of light, Buck.
Step into the mind of DDD. Now you must clobber that Kirby.
And the herald of darkness, Sam.
And now to see the Pharaoh, he must solve my riddles 3.
Joining us, new first-time guest and Altered World event, Stef. How you doing, Stef?
Bring me the head of Buscemi. I will grant you immortality. Hi.
God,
Find the lady of the light.
I liked Steph's the best, personally. Steph, how you doing today? You feeling wonderful?
I am feeling fantastic, and I'm so excited to be here talking about Alan Wake.
It's such a beautiful, wonderful game. Now, as with all first-time guests who are capital G certified gamers, we do have to give you the questionnaire. Are you ready?
I'm so ready.
Steph, what was your first console and your first video game?
So my first console that I'm just like cognizant of was the Sega Genesis, and the one game that I remember playing on it was WCW Championship Wrestling.
Wow.
Fucking go!
That had to suck. That game, there was
So
no game in that.
Japanese 16-bit wrestling games were good. American 16-bit wrestling games were not good.
American wrestling games have never been good, I would say.
That's a great answer. What's your all-time favorite game, Steph?
I really struggled thinking about this one. I do think that I have to go with The Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind.
Real one.
It's a game that feels good every time I come back
It's
to
a
it.
very gamer choice, too.
It's real. Hey.
There are a lot of games that I'll like go to replay because I'm like, oh my god, I love this game, and I'll sit there and I'll be like, it's the same thing again. It's the same thing again. Can I skip this? Can I skip this?
Yeah.
I hate doing this quest.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I'm replaying Dragon Age Inquisition in
sorry.
preparation for the Veilguard. And the entire time I'm going through the hinterlands, I'm just like, I hate this area so much.
You can just say you hate Dragon Age
So-
here. You're among friends.
So
I love Dragon Age. There's a lot of good things in Inquisition. It's just not 80% of the game.
yeah. Can I interject a very fun Buck-based statistics into this?
Do it.
Because I was looking at my PSN profile, and on PS5 it shows you your most played games, right?
Yep.
By hours. So for me, Final Fantasy 14, 1,027 hours is
Woo!
number one.
Off to a big start.
MMO. Reasonable.
Destiny 1, 553 hours.
Also basically an MMO. Reasonable.
Dragon Age Inquisition, 190 hours.
Jesus.
That's rough, buddy.
Jammed so much stuff to do in that game, and an overwhelming majority of it isn't fun.
Yep.
Like, the characters, great. The story, great. The fact that they decided they had to make it an MMO or MMO style open world game full of like Ubisoft game bloat, terrible.
Terrible.
If I have to do one more side quest that is called I pick up a note and I go to a place and I fight a monster and the quest resolution is me picking up another note,
Real note pilled. Real
I am
note
going to
pilled.
shoot Trick Weeks in the ear.
They're note maxing. They're note maxing in that game. What is your all-time favorite piece of fiction?
Collectively, I think I'm going to have to go with The World of Darkness.
Okay.
So real.
I'm particularly really big into Werewolf the Apocalypse at the moment, but my original love and like enduring love is Vampire the Masquerade. So I couldn't really pick. So just the whole thing.
I mean, that is one body of fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that plays.
What is the worst game that you still love?
So going back to Dragon Age.
Dragon Age Origins. That game sucks.
It's actually going to be Dragon Age 2 for me.
Okay.
Is it worse than Dragon Age Origins?
A lot of people regard Dragon Age 2 as the worst game of the series.
Okay.
And to their credit, the fact that the level design is so lackluster that every bad thing that happens outside of Kirkwall happens in the exact same cave. You just enter and exit from different points. However, I think it is a really interesting and compelling story, and I think that it has, even though Alistair from Dragon Age Origins is always going to be my baby boy, I think collectively Dragon Age 2 has the best set of companions. They are fun to interact with, and like, it straight up feels like you are actually a group of friends who are doing things together, even if you might have like your little interpersonal beefs, as opposed to the other games where you are a ragtag band of mismatched people who are kind of thrown together because you have to go save the world.
Yeah.
Man, they really put all their gameplay designers on Mass Effect, didn't they?
In our very first episode, my answer to that question was Inquisition.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Finally, if you could make a game with any concept, what would you want it to be?
For the longest time, I have desperately wanted an isometric turn-based Star Wars RPG.
That would be good.
Like
Star Wars XCOM.
less Star Wars XCOM and more like Harebrained Schemes did a really good series of Shadowrun isometric RPGs. And if I could have like one of those games, but it's Star Wars, I would love that so much.
I don't think I've ever met anyone who knows about those PC Shadowrun games.
I own all
you're
of
the
them.
first.
They're
I was saying,
incredible.
Buck is
All
sitting
of
right
them.
over
What are
there.
you talking
That guy
about?
knows all kinds of weird bullshit games.
The first one, Shadowrun Returns, is kind of weak, but the fact that it did well enough commercially for them to produce Dragonfall in Hong Kong. No, I was going to say, the fact that it did well enough to produce Dragonfall and Hong Kong, both of which I think are fantastic games. And unfortunately, Harebrained Scheme's most recent release, Lamplighters League, did not do very well, so they're probably going to get the EA treatment. But
I have played through the entirety of the Super Nintendo Shadowrun.
I have too. That game is terrible. That game sucks so bad. Alan Wake is a 2010 action survival horror game developed by Remedy Entertainment. I'm going to butcher all these names because they're Finnish. It was written by Sam Lake, Miku Rautalauti, and Petri Jarviletto, and directed by Marcus Mecki. Sam has buried his head in his hands laughing at me. In the game, you play the eponymous Alan Wake in his adventure through Bright Falls, a small Pacific Northwestern town where he quickly finds that something terrible has happened to the citizens, and he must convince law enforcement not to arrest him, as well as save his dear wife, Alice. Inspirations for the game include most heavily Twin Peaks, less so but still present are The Twilight Zone, the works of Stephen King, as well as other various horror literary writers. Themes include love, the relationship of an author to his audience. So, folks, quick pulse check. What do we feel about Alan Wake?
This was like 80% of a good game.
Yeah. It is definitely sort of historically regarded as a cult classic and something that is a little rough around the edges, but very solid in concept.
Yeah.
And like most of the way there in execution.
I think if I were to like neg this game for a couple things, which is not a significant number of things compared to some of the other like cult classics we've played for the podcast, I would neg it for the combat, especially as it pertains to like the last 10%, like mostly chapter 6. And I think they didn't quite stick the landing as hard as I would have liked them to. I think they got really close, but it felt like they I don't want to say they ran out of development time. It felt more like they necessarily like knew the direction they wanted to take the story, but didn't quite pace it in such a way to give it the room it needed to breathe.
I really enjoyed this game, but as a person with sensory issues, it was very hard to play for any amount of time because there is an entire mechanic of enemies appearing where your audio gets fucking overloaded by like the darkness encroaching, like as part of the horror thing. And it's really rough. And also, I said before pod, they accidentally tried to make survival horror mechanics and Max Payne level design work together.
Yeah, that was the other thing that like annoyed me a little bit was like every time you would after a cutscene you would spawn in and Alan Wake would be like, I lost my gun. I'm like, this motherfucker can't hold on to shit. But then every time it would be like after like 10 minutes of a level, it'd be like, all right, here's a pistol and a shotgun and a hunting rifle. And it's like, okay, well,
all together,
what was
all
the
in the
point
same
of
place.
taking it away from me if you were just like,
The point is actually to make sure that you don't feel like you have to conserve ammo and resources.
Sure.
Because you know you're going to lose it and regain it, so
Yeah.
you don't just like try and save elixirs until the final boss.
Yeah, it was like it was one of those things where it's like I get what they were going for. It's just like after the third time,
It didn't connect with you. It felt like a game.
It's a little. I was like, we're getting a little ridiculous.
My biggest issue is what are the things survival horror games are like really well known for?
Inventory
management and puzzle solving, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
The first fucking puzzle you solve in this goddamn game is a little baby to put the mine shaft bridge up.
I don't think there were really.
It's not even really a puzzle.
I wouldn't say there are any puzzles.
They
in this game.
they
I don't really think there's puzzles. I think
Yeah.
there's just like level.
and like I personally
Obstacles.
would have preferred like because the point of those things is to pace out like the scares,
combat,
right?
yeah,
the
the scary
combat,
part.
right? And like they really didn't do that. In
I think.
my opinion.
Well, so to counter that a little bit, I think that rather than doing puzzles, the breath of the breathing in this game, like getting a moment to breathe, is the episodes of Night Springs
yeah,
and the radio
yeah.
show.
Yeah.
So rather than giving you puzzles to solve, they build the ambiance of the world by letting you indulge in things in world.
Steph?
First off, I want to say I think that Mason was very remiss in talking about the influences of Alan Wake because he did miss the most obvious one, which is Kingdom Hearts.
Don't make me
don't do this.
Don't make
do
me
this.
talk about
Don't do
people on
this.
the internet.
Don't do this.
People on the internet will be so mad at me.
Don't.
I'll drop it for now, but we will be revisiting this when we talk about the end of the game.
We have to talk.
son of
we
a
have to
bitch.
talk about the darkness.
Oh, motherfucker.
I'm sorry. Thomas Zane straight up says the line, there is no, it has no heart. You
has
must
no
fill its
heart."
heart with light. And that is the most Tetsuya Nomura
That's
thing
out of-
Sam Lake has ever
that's
written.
straight out of.
So timeline wise, how close were the release of these games to each other?
We were at 358 and a half days by the time this game came out.
Yeah, Kingdom Hearts was 2002, the original?
I don't
Yeah,
want to do this
it was-
episode anymore.
It was. Alan Wake came out in 2010, and the first Kingdom Hearts was an early PlayStation 2 game.
What a fucking nightmare.
It was yeah, it too.
An American Nightmare, perhaps?
Yeah.
I just said we were above this pun-based comedy.
You might be. I'm not.
Son of a
Have
bitch.
you
Anyway,
read
so-
the title of this video game?
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
Anyway, so fucking Kingdom Hearts.
So setting aside Kingdom Hearts, I unabashedly I love Alan Wake. I definitely agree that it becomes a much better game in the context of the full Remedy shared universe
Yeah.
control Alan Wake 2 thing.
I think I will like this game more after I play the next ones.
You absolutely will. Like, for me personally, playing back through this game again in preparation for the podcast, after having recently played Alan Wake 2 and the first DLC, the way that things hit you is, I mean, it's entirely different. I still think as a standalone experience, especially if you're like a fan of Twin Peaks or the Twilight Zone,
Pulpy horror.
it's very satisfying. I agree that there are parts where the combat feels very lackluster, which is really funny coming from the studio that made Max Payne.
Yeah. One of the most revolutionary shooters of all time.
And what's really wild about it is I recently sat down. I know this isn't the subject of the podcast, but I decided to delve into Alan Wake's American Nightmare, the spinoff of this game. And the combat in American Nightmare is so satisfying. There's a huge breadth of weaponry, and it really it takes the Alan Wake conceit and reminds you that this is the studio that made Max Payne.
Yeah. I think my favorite comment that was made in our podcast chat was when Buck was like, "Why didn't Alan Wake just write himself to not be a loser shooter?"
My exact comment was, why didn't he write? And then I pulled out 2 double flashlighted pistols and started using bullet time.
It was very good.
The other thing that I want to address about the gameplay specifically, there is the gag that he's always losing his gun, but one of the things that I really like about it is typically in the segments where you don't have your gun, it is because they are introducing you to a new mechanic in the game. So the first time you lose your gun, they are introducing you to how to use hand flares while you've got another guy with you who's shooting the Taken. And so it forces you to learn how to use the hand flares effectively without your traditional tool of the gun to back it up. And then the second time it takes your gun is when you're fleeing the trailer park, and that's when it introduces the flashbang grenades. So once again, it's forcing you to learn how to handle groups of Taken with the flashbang grenades. I think it's a really good way to introduce you to new mechanics and force you to learn how to deal with them, as opposed to, because otherwise if you picked up a flashbang grenade but you were perfectly comfortable with the gun and flashlight thing, you would never mess around with them until you got to a point where you were too stuck, and then you were getting frustrated, and you might have a hard time deploying a new technique.
I just don't. There's more times they take away the gun, like when you fall out of the helicopter and they're like, "All right, you didn't hold on to your gun." Dog, that's the one thing you should have done.
almost more than the flashlight.
I think it is good for teaching you mechanics. If that was the only times you lost it, I would fall in line with this. I think that's very fair assessment.
The best part is when you're 60% of the way through the game, you're taking a drive with Barry. You see Alan put the gun on the dashboard, and you're like, "God damn it, keep it in your pocket." Brother, I know where this is going. Okay, so to kind of delve into sort of the narrative of the game and sort of what we're going to be talking about, Alan Wake at its core is a story that is about writer's block and an artist's sort of relationship to his fans and the community who enjoys their work while they are dealing with writer's block. Alan is someone who is surrounded by a wife who loves and believes in him, an agent who loves and believes in him, and an adoring fan base who thinks he can do no wrong, and still has the audacity to be sad. What a piece of shit. And shitty and violent too. Actually, Alan Wake is in the first game. It was almost very striking for me to sort of play the game again and remember how he acts, because he is a short-tempered jerk who comes off as very angsty and brooding in this game. And it's comedy, but
yeah. If I didn't know this game took place in the same universe Control does, I'd be like, is this dude just insane and going on a murder, a homicide spree?
Well,
that is what I like. I'm still not convinced that's not what happened.
I have a theory about that. I have a sort of interpretation of the story that's about that.
It's definitely a very far cry from the sort of
sad
pathetic,
cat man.
Yeah, I was gonna say the pathetic wet cat version of Alan Wake that we get later in the series.
Yeah, I guess 20 years of being stuck in your own personal hell will do that to you. But in this game, Alan is just characterized as being short-fused and mopey and angsty
and arrogant. They talk about when he's trying to explain these experiences to Barry. Barry talks about how you're the skeptic. You laugh at people who talk about supernatural experiences and things like that.
That's true. Alan,
and also his interactions with his wife and like him on the show, like you see him on like a talk show, like I didn't like buy into Alan even ever really like being like a protagonist I should root for until I was convinced that maybe this stuff is actually happening.
Huh.
Like
So really, Alan Wake is just BoJack Horseman.
Okay. All right. Not everything is BoJack Horseman.
The
Okay,
people that have watched the show know exactly what I'm talking
You know what?
about.
I'm willing to sign on to a compact here. I'll stop talking about Alan Wake being Kingdom Hearts if Sam never talks about BoJack Horseman again.
Shake.
I'm
Listen,
not wrong, though.
listen. Steph is also technically not wrong.
I'm not saying I never said Steph was wrong. I want that on the record.
So yeah, I find that interesting because like, it seems like at the beginning of the game, Alan's like marriage is on the rocks, and then Barry calls, and Alan's like, "Oh God, my money grubbing assistant
Right.
is calling. I bet he just wants me to write." And then like you see these interactions where Alice is like, "I love you. I signed you up to go to a therapist. I bought you a typewriter that I thought you'd love. Having writer's block is totally okay. I want you to be happy." And then Barry's like, "Hey, how's my $1 million writer? I will fly to the Pacific Northwest right now to get you out of legal trouble that you for sure super duper did because you for sure punched that guy."
I have a counterpoint.
Yep.
I actually think what Alice did was a little fucked up.
I 100% agree with that.
I don't think like that. One of like the worst things you can do to a person is be like, "Surprise! I signed
want
you
you
up
to
for
work."
therapy."
Well, yeah.
It's
I-
not even like, because like it in the realm of like trying to get someone to get help, the worst thing you can do is like force them into it because they are not doing it of their own volition.
I could concede that Alice's actions were misguided and probably not constructive. I do think if you look at the totality of her interactions with Alan, she at least had her heart in the right place,
yeah,
right?
this is one of those things where it's like she is well intentioned, but
Went about it
she
super
does-
wrong.
She not only does she go about it super wrong, she doesn't even like when Alan confronts her about it, she doesn't even contemplate that what she did might have not been the right thing to do.
Like, I hate to bring therapy speech into the pod, but you know, as someone who loves her wife very much, if I was very explicit with my wife, you know, hey, I really need a break from all of like the pressures of like my job and stuff like that. I really want to go on this romantic getaway with you, which is kind of like the presentation that we have for their trip to Bright Falls.
Yeah.
And then we get there and my wife is like, "Oh, by the way, I brought work with us and I
Yeah.
signed you up for work therapy." I
Yeah.
would be like, "Whoa, you're seriously violating my boundaries right now."
Yeah.
Yeah. That makes a lot of sense.
So like I can't even I can say that she is well intentioned, but at the same time, it's like, oh, the road to hell is paved with good intentions, yada yada.
And,
but like,
like,
you know,
like to cut Alan some credit too, right? Like he ended up being like a hyper successful writer, and he's like, okay, I'm going to I'm gonna finish this, and I'm gonna start a new story, and then he goes and he can't do it. That would absolutely super fucking depress you and make
that'd be
you
devastating.
now all this to say, I don't think Alan's actions are justified either.
No, they're not.
But
he
obviously
definitely physically assaults a doctor who
yeah, obviously not.
obviously the doctor's evil, but Alan does not know that at the time.
But
Yeah.
but I just don't think we can let what she does slide just because Alan is also like a bad person.
sure.
You know,
Absolutely.
I mean, it's two people both in weird, frustrated places of their relationship, right?
Yeah.
Also,
It's-
like I feel like Alice of all people should know what Alan's going through as a photographer and a fellow creative. I feel like
Yeah.
she should be able to understand a creative block,
Mm-hmm.
and that like it's not as simple as just like signing up for therapy and then it like fixes itself. I do think that she is like a tragic character I don't think she like got just desserts for her actions. I do think she ends up being a tragic character. But I can see that her actions are probably not not the best execution of her feelings. I also like the other character I really love is Barry, the producer.
Barry's my favorite character.
Barry
in
is
this game.
amazing. First off, great bit comedy from Barry with the standee.
The
like,
standee?
Look at me, I'm
Oh
Alan
my
Wake. I'm
God.
so broody.
I-
Hilarious. Funny every time.
I think the string light bandolier is my favorite.
Yeah.
Oh,
Barry
it's
bit
also also very good.
So like the standee thing was one of the things where I'm like, is any of this actually fucking happening? I don't
No.
So
like.
this is one of those to go back to Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind. This is one of those deals like in Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind where the game taken in isolation, it is supposed to be a little bit ambiguous whether things happen, but then in later entries in the canon, in order to make their later stories work, they explicitly codify the events of the game as true and real.
Okay, yeah.
It is true. So like taken in isolation though, I had a bit of an interpretation of the game that perhaps the dark place and the taken are like Alan's relationship with the guilt of like, wow, all my friends want me to go to this small town full of these people who love me, and then turn them into a story where they brutalize each other and they become killers. And it's him kind of working through how guilty he would feel doing that to all these people who are so nice and adoring and loving of him. That like when I was playing through the game again for the podcast, that is what I was thinking. Like, oh, maybe Alan doesn't want, maybe this isn't helping Alan's writer's block because he doesn't want to turn like this waitress who just unabashedly loves him and has a shrine to him. Maybe he doesn't want to turn her into a monster for money. Maybe he doesn't want to write a book where she like fucking drives her thumbs through someone's eyes. Maybe he feels like rightfully like kind of bad about that. And like that's what the taken are, is like his propensity to turn the people in his life
right.
into monsters for fiction.
I think that there's like something definitely interesting to explore there. If again, ignoring the fact that later games establish that this stuff is all
codify
real and did
as-
happen.
Yeah.
Because we do see that like Alan's relationships to people in his life strengthen through the adversity that he's experiencing. Like despite his fight with Alice early in the game, and like despite the fact that in some flashback sequences we see that their relationship was not always perfect, like the moment he loses her, the moment she is gone, his sole fixation is like saving her, and that includes doing like incredibly stupid things like meeting a kidnapper at 1 a.m. in the middle of nowhere
Without Barry jumping into Cauldron Lake twice. Well, jumping once and falling once into Cauldron Lake.
Yeah, and ultimately with the conclusion of the game, he does like sacrifice himself to save her. So that adversity really reaffirms the actual like genuine love that he has for Alice. And I don't know if we all played the DLC and if we're talking about the DLC.
We can talk about it.
Yeah, we can visit it briefly, but not everyone played it.
Okay, well, the first DLC, while Alan is like wandering around in the dark place, he keeps seeing these like ghost visions of Barry and realizing like how Barry really is his best friend and how much he misses having that support system in his life. And so I think, and I mean, even over the course of the base game, like you can see the appreciation and dedication he has for his friend Barry growing, because like there's the scene with the helicopter crash and he's not like, my fuck agent is making me do more things again. He's like, I don't care if this tunnel is safe. I'm going out there to save them because that's my best friend.
Yeah. And like Barry's like a very funny character just generally because like, you know, Alan poisons the well a little bit to tell him he's money grubby, and like he also does like money, right?
Yeah.
But like he's also like, it's very clear that he genuinely likes Alan and wants Alan to be happy.
I think Barry is actually the most important character to making this game work,
Yeah.
Yeah.
because
He foils and grounds Alan's like behavior when Alan feels like he's going through like some sort of weird mania.
yeah, and not even just that, but like the tone of this game would be such a drag.
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, if Barry was not allowed to like be fun and silly and just like enjoying it. for what it is. Like, he's reacting to all of this stuff that is happening in this game like a normal person would.
Like, hey man, there's shadow people outside. I'm gonna stay indoors. You can go do whatever you need to do. I'm gonna turn the lights on and be scared.
Yeah.
Very rational.
Yeah. So I think Barry is like the linchpin to like making the tone of the game work, which is great because that's not normal for comedic relief characters. Normally comedic relief characters are super like grinding, annoying. You wish that you could get rid of them. But that's because usually the tone of games is already like maybe a little silly or, fun. And you don't really need it. Adventurous.
Right.
Or even like if they're a little dark and brooding, it's not enough that like you actually need a character like this to kind of like fix the tone because they actually like wallow in the dark broodiness in a way that like doesn't like eclipse you as a player. But that would happen in this game if Barry was not like a part of it.
I also think Barry kind of normalizes the level of like comedy in the game to where when you see an episode of Night Springs or something, you're not like, what the fuck is this doing in this game?
In Night Springs.
I love those Night Springs
They're
episodes.
so good.
I watched so much
I didn't
classic
find
Twilight.
all of them.
I missed one. I think I missed one in chapter 6 probably.
Yeah.
But like I watched so much classic Twilight Zone as a kid, and they figured out exactly how to distill it into like however
a
long.
funny parody or whatever.
Yeah.
I think if you didn't have Barry and then you just played this super dark and depressing and downer game, and then halfway through the level they're like, this is my immortality machine.
That's a good one.
Why you would be like, what?
That was my favorite one.
That was
my
so
favorite Night
fun.
Springs.
That's the best one.
The best thing that I can say about the Night Springs episodes is how well they stay with you, because like I've played this game 3 or 4 times now, and I've watched other people play through it, and on my most recent playthrough, like I found the TVs, I hit the TV, and I was like, it does the little intro, and then it like starts talking. And I was like, oh yeah, this is the one where like the guy realizes that he's like in someone else's dream, or oh yeah, this is where the woman has the void of nothingness in her basement or whatever. So it was just like I didn't even need to sit there and watch the full things to remember like what the episode was and what the impact it had on me was. And I think for something that's just literally like a like side piece of collectible media inside of the game is incredible, actually.
And how all those episodes are tangentially related to the events of the
yeah.
game.
Do you think Alan wrote any of the episodes?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, no, we know he
Not
wrote
He wrote
ones
some
we
Night
see.
Springs.
the one that we see.
No.
I don't think he wrote any of those, no.
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 I think the concept is that Alan is seeing episodes he didn't write because those are things he's trying to live up to.
Yeah.
Because,
It would be much more in line with the game for like the dark place to kind of or the dark presence to kind of torment Alan to be like, ooh, look at all these
Successful
creative
people.
ventures.
Yeah.
So I do want to transition to a part of the game that I personally found a little bit more challenging to try and interpret and work through, which is the segment with the segments and the character of Dr. Hartman and his lab. So I am a person who has a very sort of positive and good relationship with therapy in my life. Now, I think that someone writing a story about like an evil therapist doesn't necessarily mean that they've had bad influences of therapy in their life. But I do think someone who has had bad relationship with therapy in their life is more likely to write something like this. Dr. Hartman is like this conniving evil man who is like really the sort of the caricature of Barry that Alan paints, where he just like wants to put Alan in a little box and extract money by kind of exploiting his creativity. And he ends up as a giant shadow. We'll get to that later. He ends up like kind of getting what's coming to him in this game when his whole castle comes crumbling down, and Alan sort of reclaims his freedom in a powerful like self-actualizing moment. But I do kind of want to talk about what the writers of the game's relationship with therapy is, and like why they might write something like this.
So I don't think this is really meant to be a takedown of therapy so much as it is a takedown of this like taking the stealing. This isn't how I want to say this, but stealing the flow of what therapy actually is, where there are so many like hack job quote unquote therapists out there who are like, oh, I can get you back in touch with your blank side, your love life, your sex life again with your wife. But like, there's no like actual grounded basis for like the things that they do or say. There are like actual sex therapists out there, but there are also like quacks who are just gonna like make shit up as they go. I kind of viewed Dr. Hartman in this game as a guy who like built this idyllic lodge out in the country and is just like, oh, if you're an artist having problems, come see me and I will make you a good artist again. Because
like a guy selling a miracle cure, snake oil salesman, something like that.
It's like the thing is, and it's like I can't really like prove this point one way or another because we don't actually get to see much of any of his actual methodology.
Yeah.
But so I'm working. This is like a hunch more than like an actual thing. I think I can flesh out super well. But that's how it kind of interpreted to me. I don't think this is meant to be a slight against therapy. I think this is meant to be a slight against people who put on a jacket of being a therapist.
That was my exact read on this too. Like, we didn't, I don't think as much context for this existed in 2010. But if you think about every like drop shipping influencer or day trading influencer or anything like that, I think there has always been a cottage industry of like productivity hack books or like, people who get their PhD and then, because they had like the main reason they got their PhD was to like try to have enough influence to like sell some crazy stuff that doesn't work. Like, I'm not trying to slight people with PhDs here. My best friend has 2 of them. But like you have to, I think what Hartman is, and part of it is Alan's like distrust of therapy in general, I think. I think part of this is Alan's refusal to acknowledge he has a problem, manifested most in who he thinks is the most obvious villain in this situation, which is Hartman. So, like, I think it's 2 different things. I don't think it's the writer expressing their, like Sam said, I don't think it's the writer expressing their views of therapy. I think it's the writer expressing Alan's views of therapy.
Yeah.
Sure.
It's also, like, very clear to me that Dr. Hartman does not have the tools in his clinic to help the people that are in it in an adequate fashion. I mean, there's a guy in there who's literally, like, I mean, we don't have like an actual idea what's going on with him, but like clearly has something actually mentally going on with him, but it doesn't feel like from the fact that he is still acting in the manner that he is in this clinic goes to show me that he is not equipped to like deal with some of the issues that the people here are going through. I don't remember that character's name, but he's like knocking the couches over and stuff.
And
it's like
the game designer guy.
Yeah. And it's like, oh, you have a security guy who can like pick people up and like handle a situation if he has to.
Yeah.
But that guy needs like medication, So
So I think that I overall have 3 things that I really want to point out about Hartman. The first of which, like, this game very obviously has heavy Twin Peaks influence.
Yes.
And in terms of, like, where the character of Hartman comes from, I don't know if it's so much about, like, Sam Lake or anyone else at Remedies, like, views of therapists so much as they are interpreting the, like, scummy, self-serving therapist character from Twin Peaks into the world of Alan Wake.
That makes a lot of sense.
Much like in the same way that Cynthia Weaver is clearly an interpretation of the Log Lady.
Yeah.
But I think that like there's definitely a good kernel of truth in talking about this as kind of like addressing the sort of like self-help industry and like the way that we see like Hartman's book and the way he presents himself. He definitely has the vibes of like a self-help guru who's like propped themselves up, or almost like a televangelist. The first thing I always think of when I see Hartman's book covers, I think of Joel Osteen.
Yep.
Yeah.
And with how much it's clear, despite them being very Finnish, the writers like consumed elements of Americana to create this game. I think that's probably intentional. The third thing I'll point out, and for context, I have had both positive and negative experiences with therapy in my own life. But I think that Hartman may not necessarily be intended to either like demonize the field of therapy or to like send up quack therapy in particular. But there is a very particular strain that I want to say was popular in like the 80s and 90s in like mainline psychology with the like the repressed memories hypothesis and like satanic ritual abuse and all that, where you had cases of, now it's pretty widely regarded that like repressed memory isn't really a thing and there's not really strong evidence to indicate it ever was a thing, but for the most part it's believed that intentionally or otherwise these therapists were inducing false memories of extreme childhood abuse in vulnerable people in order to advance their own careers so they could write papers about it. And it was like, it was sensational. It was incredible. It was these new boundaries of psychology. And I think that's really what Hartman's trying to do to Alan. You know, he is going through the process of induction with these like false memories of like, Alice is dead. You're having a psychotic breakdown, which like, in the text of the game, you know, we can go back and forth over whether it's like real or representative. I think the fact that like Barry shows up and explicitly says, "You're not crazy, Al," is the developers telling us very clearly that
not psychosis.
Yeah, like they want us to read that this is something that's actually happening.
Yeah, even
if there may be metaphorical implications to it.
I would agree with that.
Yeah.
So to me, I think that's kind of what Hartman's getting at. And this was not something that was a big news story in 2010, but the repressed memories and the satanic ritual abuse induction kind of like scam, more or less, was big, like I said, in the 80s and 90s when Sam Lake, at least, was like kind of like growing up, and presumably, because I want to say that he started writing at like, I don't remember when
Max Payne 1 released when he was like 22.
Yeah, so like
he was very early.
It would have been like relevant at the time.
Yeah.
And I do wonder if that's where some of this comes from, because that's a lot of what I see in Hartman, and especially the way that like again, revisiting the DLCs, and I believe the second one, there is a kind of like modified interview. I did not have time to replay the second one for this, so this is going on like when I played it like a year ago, kind of fuzzy knowledge, but there's an extended interview between like Alice and Hartman through, I want to say, the lens of like the dark presence, where it's very like twisted and manipulative. I think literally playing the interview tape gets you an achievement. I play this on Xbox, so it's a trophy if you're on something. But it's, the description is like, have a drop of poison put in your ear or something like that. And I think that really underscores the manipulative nature of what Hartman's doing. He's not just like a casual influencer. He is someone who is, he's not an influencer and he's not a quack. He is someone who is deliberately manipulating the patients in his care for his personal enrichment and results.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah.
I would agree with all that.
Yep.
Hey, speaking of influencers, how would you like to help us become one? Probably not, but still, you could help us out immensely by liking, subscribing, rating us 5 stars, or sharing us on any of our social media feeds. Check out our TikTok, our Facebook page, our Discord. We're always happy to have new people on board. Anyway, I'll throw you back.
All right. So, a couple other things I want to kind of cover here. Number one, Alan's relationship to other creatives that exist in his life and in the story. We've talked a little bit about his relationship with Alice, who is portrayed mostly positively and that he would kind of do anything for. Now, they obviously, their marriage is kind of on the rocks at the beginning of the game, and Alice does a bunch of very misguided things. But there are other creatives that are in the game, like Thomas Zane, as well as the Anderson brothers, the old gods of Asgard.
Oh,
They're so good.
I love them.
There is like a bit of a sort of like a boomer pilled kind of attitude that's prevalent through all these guys. That's like, oh, you gotta be a little crazy to be an artist. You know what I mean? That's like sentiments like that. But I do think, first off, very cool representation of these like old 70s and 80s metal guys, as well as like these people that are like, you know, creatives seem to be the people that want to help Alan and like know the things. There's like this mutual understanding between his fellow artists, right? Because Tor and Odin, thank you. Tor and Odin both are like, they're both also patients at Hartman's, and they're like, hey man, like we get you, we understand you. Like go hang out at our farm.
We like you, Charlie.
It's like a haven for people like you. And Thomas Zane is always like dropping in to be like, you're gonna need this like flashlight. This is gonna be like the thing that helps you out. I think it like speaks to now they like the events of this game were written because after Remedy wrote Max Payne 2, they had to sell the franchise because they like literally didn't know how to end it. They had the writers at Remedy had like terrible writer's block. They ended up selling Max Payne to Rockstar and then writing this game about their struggles with finishing the Max Payne trilogy.
Finish.
Which is also this is like an autobiography then, because this is exactly what Alan's going through.
Yeah.
Well, Alan Wake is supposed to be Sam Lake.
Sam
right?
Lake,
like,
yeah.
You know, a stand-in.
If you, sorry, the idea for the stupidest joke ever. I'm gonna not ruin y'all's day.
I think you should do it, coward.
You know, if you abbreviate Alan's name, you get A Wake, which is like awake.
Yeah.
And if you abbreviate Sam Lake's name, you get Slake, which doesn't make any fucking sense. It's nothing.
It's slaking your thirst.
But yeah, like
Taking a nice drink from the lake, or perhaps an ocean.
Ooh. We'll get to that. Don't worry. We'll get to that. We'll speak on that. So like I do like that they had like these characters in the game that seem to communicate that like, oh yeah, other artists know what we were going through. Other creatives like were the ones that understood us when times were bad. Now, Thomas Zane, it ends up, again, because of the later game's canon, there's like a much, much, much more complex relationship. Just, again, taking this game where it's at. These other artists kind of find Alan in these like terrible times where he's like the most powerless and most, he's at his absolute worst, and they kind of bring him up. I think it speaks to like a really beautiful relationship that maybe artists share and this mutual understanding that they have. Did y'all have any specific thoughts about Zane or the Andersons?
I thought Thomas Zane looked like a lot like a Big Daddy.
That's true. Well, he does also.
He's in a diver's suit.
Also, out of the suit, he looks a lot like a daddy. We'll get to that.
I like that the brothers are two of the first people that Alan meets throughout. And, like, I really like the brothers, because to me what it seems like is the brothers are there to provide Alan an outlet to try to, like, look for his creativity and do the coolest action sequence in the game. the fighting the enemies on the stage while the
Buck, can I tell you something that's going to really make you happy?
what?
You haven't seen fucking nothing yet. Like Kojima, you know how Kojima always does the your mentor was actually betraying you, like his little signature. Sam Lake's signature is like the musical level, and it gets so much better.
Alan Wake 2 has 2 of them, and they're both amazing.
Both good.
I mean, the old gods of Asgard are basically the Greek chorus of this game.
Yeah.
They are.
You know, they keep showing up in places where like maybe they probably shouldn't be.
Yeah.
I like how the town is just
They
like
just sing songs about the events of the game.
I like how all the people in the town are just like, oh yeah, that's Tor and Odin. They clearly broke out of Hartman's facility again. Just give them coffee. They're cool.
Yeah. I really like that part of them. And, as someone who literally knows nothing about Zane except for this game, like, I also thought, like, for me personally, there's, like, to me, it, like, did the things that happened to Zane, so, like, Zane happened, and he only exists in that box, and he's not a creation of Alan from the book that he wrote, that,
That was the other interesting thing to me, right? Is that in theory, if I'm taking this, and I have not played any other Remedy games, me and Buck are in this blind, and Mason and Stef are in this fully locked and loaded.
Fully initiated, you might
So
say.
I think it's one of the most interesting conundrums I've found about this game was that the existence of Thomas Zane and Alan Wake is a paradox through the lens of the writing things in the context of the dark presence causes them to happen. And Thomas Zane wrote autobiographical things about Alan Wake, and Alan Wake wrote autobiographical things about Thomas Zane. So as a result, they have kind of created each other.
A sort of Ouroboros
Yeah.
of making the other exist.
Yeah. Well, Ouroboros is whatever.
yeah. Ouroboros is one thing.
A double or
Double Ouroboros. And
Yeah.
Infinity Ouroboros.
yeah, double.
Like
Anyways, I just
yin-yang
thought-
and an Ouroboros
I just
together.
thought that was a really cool, and I wasn't like quite. I'm still not quite sure how to interpret it.
Yeah.
That these authors have like created. They have.
They wrote
in a
they wrote
sense-
fan fiction of each other.
Yeah, in a sense, they have caused each other to exist through the scope of the dark presence. Obviously in the real world, that's not the case, but like they have like written themselves into each other's reality. But only because only because Thomas Zane
Don't hurt yourself.
wrote in the past.
Don't hurt
and this would
yourself.
happen in
There's
the
steam
future.
coming out of your ears. Don't try and figure it out. It's meant to be a little hard to wrap your head around.
I mean, I get it.
Do you?
Yes, because Thomas Zane wrote when he originally was the author, he wrote that sometime in the future, Alan Wake would uncover the clicker.
Yeah,
And that
yeah.
would be the thing that undoes the darkness.
Yeah.
He wrote that into his story because he wasn't able to figure out how he could make it end in a way that would get him a happy ending.
Yeah.
Or a good ending. So instead, he made up another character that would have to be the person to figure it out, and essentially planted this seed in Alan's life that would, down the line, give Zane the ability to, like, not free himself, but, like, at least
stop the dark
control
presence.
of the dark presence. Yeah.
If you think about it, he kind of writes a sacrificial lamb because Alan knows that the only way a horror novel can end is through balance and sacrifice, and ends up sacrificing himself to save Alice. So in a way, even though Zane doesn't know it, he's like writing a tragic character who's going to throw themselves on the rocks in order to contain the dark presence.
So I'm going to have a little bit of a hard time talking about Thomas Zane because of how much context shows up about him later. And the only thing I'm going to say about the later is Mason is 100% wrong. Out of the suit, he is not a daddy. He is a ketamine-addled twink. But
I said he looks like a daddy. I said he looks like a daddy, which is true. Anyway,
So, Thomas Zane, as he exists in the text of Alan Wake 1, there are a few important things to note about him. One is, so the Anderson brothers refer to Alan exclusively as Tom. And it's a little ambiguous if it's just they look similar or if, like, they're in kind of this advanced state of dementia and, like, they don't really know who they're talking to. Or if it is, you know, Alan is in this kind of like similar role as Tom was, and that's like the recollection that they have. Or perhaps if the interrelation between Alan Wake and Tom Zane is so great that to the perceptions of the Anderson brothers, there's no distinction between the two of them.
yeah.
The other thing that I think is interesting to explore, and this is only if you played the remaster, because I revisited the original version of the game. I did my full playthrough on the remaster because I think it just like, it cleans up a lot about the game. It makes the atmosphere feel better to me. And going back and playing like the original Alan Wake, it's so much just an Xbox 360 game, which isn't inherently a bad thing, but there's a lot that's so indicative of that era that it distracts me from the actual like work itself. But in the remaster, in both games there are several flashback scenes to Alan's apartment. In the remaster specifically, you can go into the closet in his bedroom, and there is a dresser in the closet, and on top of that dresser there is a shoebox. And if you take a screen capture of that shoebox and then zoom in on it, that shoebox is full of the collected works of Thomas Zane. Which, of course, we later learn from Cynthia Weaver that everything about Tom Zane's work that he didn't destroy or write out of existence, he saved in a single shoebox. And somehow Alan has that.
That's weird.
And
No, it's not. He
but
probably wrote that.
so like, you know, the other thing to think about here is one of the first things that happens when you go into the cabin is you see that shoebox, right? So did Alice have it?
Alice might have brought it.
Yes,
Yeah.
he might have brought it with him.
If it's in her
But
house, it is
Alan
not out of
acts
the realm
like
of possibility.
Alan explicitly says he had never seen it before.
It's also possible that like he didn't have it at his house and he's just like projecting it into his flashback.
Either way,
that's
I think
possible.
it's also significant to note that it is something that they added between the original release of the game and the remaster. Because the reason that I played a decent chunk of both is to see like a few small details that they altered. Namely, there are a few posters of Thomas Zane around in the original version. And for the remaster, they updated them to the Tom the Poet movie poster that they use in Alan Wake 2.
That sounds like these were changes made specifically to set up for the second game rather than like cleaning up misconceptions about the first one.
It could be. I mean, it could be a little column A, a little column B, right? God, we're going to get a little bit onto the sequel. Sam Lake has said that he wishes it were true that everything was set up perfectly for the sequel and he had it planned the whole time. But a lot of things were just like he figured them out while writing Alan Wake 2 and was just like looking back onto the works and trying to find ways to connect the dots.
I'm going to say a controversial thing here. Perfect continuity is lame and not cool.
It's not necessary.
If some, yeah.
especially for a world that is as ethereal as Alan Wake is.
We're not really a lore-pilled podcast anyway. Like,
It was just something that I noticed that I thought was interesting and worth sharing. And
I
perhaps...
do think that is a really cool detail they've added in. I do like that there are these connections between Tom and Alan that only manifest themselves in the flashbacks, especially if you are to take Alan at his word that is actually not what the events of the past were. Like I think it indicates that Tom might have been watching those flashbacks or might have been sort of his influence was kind of pushing along like the invisible hand of the free market, pushing things in the correct direction.
The other thing that I want to say in terms of like the role of other artists in Alan's life is I have a little bit of a thing to go on about the old gods of Asgard. If y'all will permit me to go on a little bit of a spiral, not
Go
a
on
loop.
it. Spiral.
Um,
Stop doing that.
no. So one thing that I think is fascinating about the old gods of Asgard, and Sam talked about their songs describing the events of the game. It's not 100% clear, but the two old god songs that appear in the original Alan Wake, The Poet and the Muse and Children of the Elder Gods, both may have been written by Alan himself. Because one of the things that I did to prepare for this was I did a Nightmare playthrough of the game, which I've never done before. And for anyone playing Alan Wake for the first time, I actually strongly recommend starting on Nightmare because it gave me much more of an omnipresent sense of dread and a lot more of a lot of people talk about how Alan Wake is not really a survival horror game, but you feel the survival horror vibes much more strongly if you play through it on Nightmare. And with
I'm not good enough of a gamer to do that.
I don't think I'm a particularly good gamer either. Like I struggle and still have not finished Elden Ring. I was able to make it through on Nightmare, so
It is at least easier than Elden Ring.
it is at least easier than Elden Ring.
What a terrible scale.
But so on Nightmare mode, there are exclusive manuscript pages that you can pick up, and manuscript pages that you pick up on Nightmare mode in episodes 5 and 6 are the lyric sheet to The Poet and the Muse and the lyric sheet to Children of the Elder Gods. And it's not even like he has written them like as dialogue and text. It is he has written the lyric sheets as part of his manuscript. And if we, fully buy in that his manuscript is what has created everything that he's going through, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's created the old gods because they existed before he showed up in town and wrote all of this. However, when we were talking earlier about how the inhabitants of Bright Falls play into the story that he's written, and the reference to them kind of serving like a Greek chorus, I can definitely see, because Alan talks very frequently about how much like the story he's writing has to make sense. For it to come true, it has to ring true, and that means that it has to play to like certain themes of like literature and genre in general. And so the idea that he kind of like took these two old men, former rockers, and decided to kind of like cast them in the role of like chorus or soothsayer or mentor figure to give him, the protagonist, the tools and knowledge he needed to move forward with the story, I think is super compelling. And I think that in the same way we talked about how Hartman may reflect Alan's relationship with therapy, I think the way that he includes the Anderson brothers as supporting characters in this story talk about his relationship to other artists and how he draws influences, especially from kind of like an older echelon of creatives, because he even explicitly talks at points about, early in my career, I took so much inspiration from Stephen King.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, I'm taken aback. That was a really good Alan Wake. That was very good. You work on that? Oh my god,
a little bit. But yeah. So I think that that's an interesting element of the Anderson brothers to kind of like dive into a little bit. And this is something that hadn't even occurred to me until I did this Nightmare playthrough, because I didn't realize that Alan had written the lyrics to those songs.
I think one of the interesting, so I didn't play on Nightmare. Mason sent exactly one page from the Nightmare.
It was the one you sent me.
I was like, I don't. The context of that page is that it is basically like, it basically just says, and then I bend down and pick up the page, and then it just repeats that over and over and over.
It's funny.
And so I almost like,
it's a loop.
It's a loop, yeah. That page specific. I don't know what this is a reference to.
Don't worry, you'll get it.
You'll figure it out.
Okay. That page specifically almost makes me feel like some or all or maybe none of the Nightmare pages are not canon to the manuscript, And it's hard for me to say one way or another. Theoretically, that page specifically can't really exist in the context of the manuscript because it would just go on forever.
It's not that they are not canon. It's more that they are less important to figure out the context of the story. I think the game designers rightfully understood that very, very few people would play Nightmare and get the Nightmare exclusive collectibles, and therefore, if they probably had a list of all their manuscripts in front of them, and they picked out the funny ones or the extemporaneous ones, and they're like, these will be kind of Nightmare exclusives.
Yeah,
you're right. That would spiral forever, but.
Because yes, there are other pages that are Nightmare collectibles that are definitely things that have happened in the story that just happen to be extraneous to like the actual main line. Like in the first chapter, there's a Nightmare page you pick up. At some point in the chapter, I think you hear on like a radio show or something, a guy talking about like his dog has gone missing.
Yeah, it's the first Pat Main broadcast. A guy calls in and is like, "Oh, my dog."
And you pick up the Nightmare page that you pick up in that level talks about the dog's death. So
now I'm sad.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I mean, I figured that's where that was going.
There's a really like almost like Max Payne-esque line in that one where it's something like fear passed through the dog's mind right before the blade of the axe did or something like that.
Oh my god.
And that's absolutely Max Payne Sam coming out to play.
Yeah.
But
that's brutal.
So okay, I've gotten back to the other thing that I wanted to say about Alan as a writer and as his relationships to other creatives, is that obviously this story is very essentially about how it's, Sam Lake talking about writer's block and feeling overcome with not knowing how to end Max Payne. Alan can't figure out how to move on after killing off his title character, Alex Casey. And it's part of a pretty consistent theme in literature where, like, going all the way back to, like, Arthur Conan Doyle killing off Sherlock Holmes and eventually, like, not having enough success moving forward that he brought Sherlock Holmes back. And you have, in more recent memories, I think that Alan Wake is very clearly inspired by James Patterson and James Patterson's character, Alex Cross, for anyone who are familiar with those books.
Across. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks. He's played by Morgan Freeman in one of the film adaptations. But so it's Alan as a writer, like, suffering from and running from his own body of work, right? Like, he feels trapped and persecuted by his own creative power. And even whether we interpret this literally or like metaphorically, that's still what the story is about. And so I would say the fact that he casts the other creatives in his life specifically as heroes guiding him through this, Zane and the old gods, and less so Alice in this game, spoilers for the future. But I think it's very interesting because of how, like, inspiration from other people can move you forward. And to some extent, I think that might be Sam Lake writing a little bit of a love letter to David Lynch and Twin Peaks, giving him the inspiration he needed to move forward and get out from under the crushing weight of Max Payne.
I think I had read a story, and it was one of the reasons why they wanted to make this game a horror mystery was while they were in the middle of their really bad writer's block, Sam Lake locked himself and the other two head writers in a room, and they just weren't allowed to leave until they came up with something. And they just wrote about the dread and horror they were feeling in the room as they got more and more stressed out. I think that's probably why they turned to inspirations that are the horror mystery kind of genre, like Twin Peaks. So let's talk a little bit about the ending before we wrap.
Real quick.
Yeah.
There's a very important thing we haven't talked about here. I just want to do this really quickly, brush it off unless anyone else has anything else to say. Is Nightingale Wake's alcoholism coming to get him?
No, Nightingale is, I think, well, it might be. I think Nightingale is a fan of Alan Wake that is too ashamed to admit that he loves a sort of guilty pleasure genre like pulp horror, which is why he always has like a writer on deck that he gets to make fun of Alan.
Right. He names so
Yeah.
many writers.
Yeah.
Like very deep pulls.
Yeah.
I think his relationship is to like the guilty pleasure reader who reads genres that are generally thought of as more lowbrow, like pulp horror, like smut, like young adult, these things that like, even though they're like perfectly valid and fine works of art that people generally kind of like hide from people and are fans of secretly. And I think he holds a resentment to Alan because even though he feels ashamed of reading and loving his works, he feels bad for Alan for like creating something that he feels like a certain shame in enjoying. That's how I read it.
But then why was he here though? Because
To shoot Alan in the head with a gun.
Yeah. Well,
I don't necessarily know if I agree that he's like somebody who is a guilty pleasure reader so much as I think that he's someone dismissive of the kind of like genre that Alan is writing in general. I think that he is like more of a sense of persecution towards like modern poppy pulpy literature.
Yeah.
And I kind of underscore that with the fact that like something bad happens to him, because like people who are really his fans, like Rose, who is a big super fan, like she has something bad happen to her, but she is ultimately like, she survives and more or less is fine, and we later learn recovers, even if she kind of like, we see her at the end holding the lantern, and like she has a negative experience. But it's specifically Hartman and Nightingale that we see like sucked into the dark presence that otherwise is like primarily interested in persecuting Alan. And so I think that is in some ways, you know, if we go back to the metaphor of him feeling the crushing weight of his work and like trapped within what he has made for himself, I think to some extent it serves as proof as well against his persecutors. And that's why we like explicitly see Hartman and Nightingale consumed by the dark presence.
I like that reading of it. So let's talk about the ending in an ultimate sort of within the context of Alan Wake and his relationship to himself and the dark place. Ultimate act of sacrifice to bring back his wife. Alan writes an ending to his manuscript where he ends up trapped in the dark place and truly like unnerved by the horror and depth of it. Even though Zane has appeared to him throughout the game in a diving suit, he sort of doesn't realize the significance of that until the very end, until he's fully immersed and unable to leave, that he's not simply dealing with the lake, with Cauldron Lake, he is dealing with an ocean, which is to say a sort of never-ending abyss in all directions, devoid of light, that he will be swimming against. Thomas Zane didn't have the diving suit as some sort of like quirky characterizing thing about him. Thomas Zane needed the diving suit because he is in the dark place, and since the dark place is an ocean, you need a diving suit to survive. Wake finds that in his he is drowning, and the game ends on a completely dour note. How did y'all like the ending?
Yeah, I wanted a little bit more. Like, I liked everything it gave, but like, and you know, I don't need a little bit more because I know Alan Wake 2 exists, right?
Yeah.
It's
now
but
they did not. I think it detracts a little bit from the ending that the final chapter and final fight of the game are a little bit of a.
I was gonna say the final level. I literally just drove my car through literally every single thing that I could.
That's based.
And I ran
That's cool.
past everything. I messaged y'all. I'm like, I cannot stand this. This is all the same shit again.
Yeah.
And then where I messaged that was at the barricade. Like I was walking up to the barricade to get to the tornado.
Yeah. It does. I think it does take a little bit of the wind out of the sails of the ending that you could be in a bit of a frustrated state of mind from playing the last chapter and not super primed to really soak it all in.
Because I had the most fun when Alan had another person.
Yeah.
Like fighting other people, like with the sheriff and with Barry and with the sheriff and Barry. Like that was when I enjoyed what I was doing the most. When it's just me walking through the abyss or driving my car through the abyss and skipping the monster truck and everything else because all I want to do is finish the game so I can record this podcast. It's, you know, and like I have to mash the button through the pushing shit. That was so lame. I hated doing. They didn't even jump scare me. They They just made me push the button to push the thing.
I promise you'll get enough jump scares for 2 games in the second one. You're gonna have to trust me on this one.
I thought for me it was just like the final fight was just like
Shoot
very
tornado.
fine, very whatever.
I didn't
Yeah.
expect a big final fight because as someone who has read several Stephen King books,
You know that's not always how these things wrap up.
yeah.
And it felt more like we need this big set piece ending to have a big set piece ending, more so than like this is
our
the
creative
logical
vision.
Yeah, this is the logical contextual conclusion of how the story ends.
When you consider that the Dark Place and the Dark Presence are both sort of representations of Alan's relationship to himself, it makes more sense that the final fight is Alan sort of battling with his own physical manifestation of his writer's block, and then Alan ultimately sort of succumbing and losing that fight.
Well, I'm not talking about like the metatextual. I'm talking about you fire
just
a flare gun in a goddamn tornado.
Yeah. That's fair. Sure.
Yeah, I mean the final fight is very much just like it feels perfunctory in a way. Like there needs to be a big dramatic final fight, but what ultimately ends up happening is you are standing there firing like and you have a box of infinite flares next to you. So you can do what I just did, which is like I am firing and reloading my flare gun as much as possible. I'm emptying out all of my ammo. I'm picking up more flares. I'm firing it again. I've got like 30 flares in the air right now. Like which the first time playing it, for me at any rate, it felt cool. It felt dramatic, but I feel like it's too drawn out. If it was do the little platforming section, get to like the heart of the tornado and like fire a single flare and get this big dramatic reaction.
That'd be sick. That'd be like the perfect.
That would feel much more satisfying to me. I think the fact that you have to sit there and like do multiple flares is where it kind of breaks down. The other thing that I really want to talk about in terms of the ending is at the very beginning of the game, we are presented with a poem by Thomas Zane, which is, "For he did not know that beyond the lake he called home lies a deeper, darker ocean green, where waves are both wilder and more serene. To its ports I've been, to its ports I've been." Zane says bean, so it rhymes, but it's not really my vibe. So, you know, he starts off with like, "Do you understand?" And Alan's like, "No," because like, why would you understand that? And then of course, like the ending of the game comes with the understanding of it's not a lake, it's an ocean. And in that regard, I really like how the game kind of like ties itself off with that. That feels really good to me. I think that it can probably feel... It may not, like, register in the brain if you're playing it on the normal difficulty, because it's been all the way since the beginning of the game since you got that. In Nightmare Mode, you pick up a page with that text on it, and I can't remember if it's the very last one you pick up, but it's very close to the end. It's in, like, Chapter 6. So you get this, like, immediate refresher of it, and then you experience that ending, and you're like, oh...
It was all foreshadowed.
I think this is about Sam Lake not being a lake but an ocean.
Okay. Sam Ocean. Socian. Doesn't work.
Still doesn't mean anything.
Can't wait for Sam Ocean to write a heist game.
Yeah. So, that is Alan Wake. That is a fun fact, a game series that I played and discovered because of you, Steph, and I am so happy that you did. Over the course of this season, we are going to play the other 2 games that are in the Remedyverse that are directly connected to Alan Wake. I guess there's 3, but we're not playing one of them. Control and Alan Wake
Are
2.
you telling me we are not playing critically acclaimed Microsoft exclusive video game Quantum Break?
You're gonna have to just eat that one. I'm so sorry.
We're also not playing American Nightmare, I want to point out.
Oh, that's true. Oh,
Which...
it has a lot of story revelations that become fully contextualized into, but don't worry. Control and Alan Wake 2 are the quote-unquote important ones.
I cannot wait to play Control. Because I really like the storytelling of Alan Wake, but I also want to be a badass.
However good you think it is, it's better.
When I was sitting down to try to like name my favorite game for this, the only other thing that held like a candle to Elder Scrolls 3 Morrowind was Control, because like I played Control, especially like not realizing it was connected to Alan Wake. And even without that context, like start to end as a self-contained experience, Control is one of the like coolest, most well-executed, most like beautiful video games I've ever played, with just like a fascinating concept behind it.
Oh yeah. So this has been Level Zero Literacy. I've been Mason. We hope you've enjoyed today. For our next episode, we will be playing Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. That is available on, I think, pretty much every current gen console, as well as in VR, if you want to play along with us. We will see you next time. Goodbye, everybody.